Hello there, and thank you so much for joining me for another tutorial. Today we're going to be practicing an exercise in keeping your florals loose and expressive with this simple floral painting. If you do like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comment section. Also, if you want to see more beginner-friendly tutorials like this one, please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Now grab your paints and let's get started. Today I'm going to be using a sheet from my Artisto Watercolor Pad. It's 140 pound, but it is a cellulose paper. I have my Royal Talons paints in my palette, jar of water, and a paper towel. And I'm just going to be using one, possibly two brushes today. I have a Princeton Neptune in a size 8 round and one in a size 4 round. So the reason I chose my Neptune brushes is because we're trying to keep this as loose as we can so we can make it as expressive as we can. And this is a softer, it's a little wet right now so you can't really see how soft it is, but it's a lot softer than, let's say, a Princeton Snap. So this just allows you to be a little more kind of relaxed with your petal shapes and your leaf shapes. So if you don't have a Princeton Neptune, just use the softest brush you have. Otherwise, you're just going to have to work a little harder at keeping your flower petals loose. So we're just going to keep it simple. Just going to use one color for the flowers. I have to spritz my palette, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to start off and show you what you don't want to do for this painting. And what you don't want to do is do really deliberate petal shapes like this. Okay, we want this to be really expressive, so you don't want to do really kind of deliberate petals like that. Same goes for the leaves. We won't be doing leaves in the typical way. You won't be doing like a light pressure, heavy pressure up like that just to get like a real kind of literal leaf shape. That's not what we're going for today. That was a bit of a mess. Okay, so try to avoid that and you'll see what I mean once I get into it, okay? So I'm just going to be using carmine for my flowers today, and it's quite vivid, quite bright. And you just want to start off with a really light wash. So I'm just going to mix a light wash over here, just so I don't have to keep going into my water so much. If I can avoid that, then your water stays clean a little longer. Okay, so you're going to start off with a light wash, like I say, and you're just going to do really loose petals. And I find it helps if you hold your brush a little further back than you normally would. And then that way you just kind of let the brush do the work. Okay, so you can see they're really loose. Okay, I'm just going to curve some of them out and down, like so. A couple out this side. And you can see they don't end in petal shapes, like really curved petal shapes there. They're very loose, almost like you don't know where the petals end, and that's what you're looking for. So I'm going to tap my brush off on my paper towel, go into some heavier pigment, just on the tip of my brush, and I'm just going to tap some in, a few little lines. This is while it's still wet, okay? Just to get some shape and dimension, and that's going to bleed out and soften a little bit. Now, non-cotton papers tend to dry a little quicker, so if you find that you need to just kind of go in with a clean damp brush and just soften some of these edges up, that's perfectly okay. Okay, so let's try that again with another flower. Again, keeping it light and expressive, and we'll just maybe throw one down here. So I'm just being really loose with it. and keeping them light. Whoops. And I forgot to mention I am deliberately leaving white space in the middle. So we'll do the same thing, tap my brush off, go in and get that heavier pigment and just do a little tapping and thin, delicate lines, just like so. You don't want to overdo it. We want to keep this light because we will be going back in. Same thing, if it's not bleeding right away, just go in and touch it with a clean, damp brush. And if you find it's a little too much pigment, you can always just go in and pick some up. But the key is loose and airy and just kind of misshapen. So maybe we'll pop another little one up there. Again, a light wash, and we're going to try to do this so it's kind of more on its side. So the petals at the back will be a little shorter. Okay, and I'm still holding my brush a little further back than what you maybe normally would. Go in with some heavier pigment again. That might be a bit much. Okay. And try not to go back in and work it too much, kind of like what I'm doing now. I don't want to play with it too much, but I'm tempted to, but I will stop. And then we're going to go in and do the same thing with some leaves. And I'm going to use sap green. I want kind of a bluish green. So I'm going to use sap green. And again, I want a heavier pigment to start. Get some Prussian blue in there. Okay, so I've got a nice deep green. I think what I will do also is add a little bit of olive green in there just to kind of mute it down a bit. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing. I don't need so much of a light wash for the leaves, but again, for the leaves, you want to avoid making your typical leaf shape and just kind of, you know, go in on the side maybe. Just drag your brush. Maybe we'll put one up here and just put them wherever. And you can see they're not leaf shapes per se. We're not trying to force your typical leaf shape. Maybe put a couple up here. One coming out here maybe. Again, just avoiding that typical leaf shape. Have some kind of hanging down. Maybe we can do another one out here even. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to tap my brush off, go into that green pigment, and just start adding some into these leaves. And you'll see when I did this one, I went beyond where I had that leaf shape, and that's what you want. You want these kind of expressive lines to go beyond your initial leaf shape. Okay, just tapping it in, just so you have variation in your leaf color and your leaf shapes, like so. And you'll see that I'm still holding my brush a little further back and letting it kind of control what happens. So So now what we want to do is I'm going to tap the excess water off my brush. I'm going to go in and get more of that green, and I'm going to tap heavy pigment in some areas on these leaves. And then what you want to do is take the back of your brush. Make sure the back of your brush doesn't have a really sharp point on it. You want it round and you want it small, but you don't want it too pointy. And then I'm just going to drag it through my leaves and drag these lines out. Okay, and only do a few leaves at a time, because you want to make sure that this is wet and that you are able to drag it out with the back end of your brush. Okay, so you don't want so many that they start to look hairy, but you just want to have these expressive lines come off your leaves and not force those typical leaf shapes. I think my mixture is not quite thick enough. I'm just going to make a little more pigmented and less water. And maybe a little more blue. And a little more olive green. And I'm just going to tap more of that in. So it wasn't quite as dark as I wanted. So now we're going to do the same thing to these other leaves. And I'm not worried about it bleeding seamlessly. And I'm not worried about these having perfect blends and stuff. I want that kind of character to it, okay? Just like that. And if you find it's getting too dark and getting too flat, rinse and dry off your brush and just go in and pick some pigment up, just so you get some highlights in your leaves and they're just not a flat, solid green. We'll do the same thing to the rest of the leaves. Okay, so I'm just tapping it in towards the end and the tips, and then just dragging out these kind of wonky lines with your brush, with the back of your brush. Still not as dark as I want it. There we go. So I'm just mixing up a little more of that green, tapping it in. Let's do this guy over here. Okay, so you're putting quite a bit of pigment down, so you are able to drag it through with your brush, and you're just doing these kind of carefree lines. And don't worry if it's like, you know, really solid there. We can go in with some water and kind of liven that up to get it to do some bleeds. I just don't want really smooth bleeds throughout these leaves, okay? So again, while it's wet, you just go in with the back of your brush, just like so. Now I think this is a little drastic, so I'm just going to soften it up a bit, just with a clean, damp brush, and just go in and just kind of nudge that edge a bit, just to soften it up just a little bit. So we'll do the rest of the leaves. This guy in here. This one here. And don't put paint on too many of your leaves, because you want it to be wet so you can drag that paint around. Just like that. And again, I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush so it's just damp. Just touch a couple of these edges. So you can see how you get these expressive leaves as opposed to just doing your typical leaf shape. And you never know what you're going to end up with, which is why it's just got that loose, expressive feeling to it. And again, I'll just touch some of these edges. I think this one can stand to be a little darker, just towards the inside, just like that. So that's it for our leaves. You could probably, you know, drag your brush through the middle just to get some veining in there if you want. So I'm quite happy with the leaves, and now it's time to go back to the flowers. Okay, and I'm taking that straight carmine, water it down just a little bit so it's quite pigmented still, and we're just going to go and tap some in the middle. You can even just take the tip of your brush and just go up the edges of some of your petals as well. Don't overdo it at this point, okay, but we are going to do the same thing. We're going to take the back of our brush and just drag some of this pigment out. And again, like we did with the leaves, I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush and just drag some of this out. Now it's not sopping wet, so you're still going to have some hard edges. And if you find the colors going too far up, just rinse your brush off and pick it up like so. Okay, so we'll do the other petals. And remember, your brush isn't very wet at this point, okay, because you're really putting down heavier pigment. And then if you just want to just do the lightest lines up the sides of some of your petals, by all means do that. But again, err on the side of less is more at this point. You can always go back in and put more in. But just be really free with those movements when you're using the back of your brush. So you're going to have soft edges and hard lines, and that's what just keeps it nice and expressive. We're not doing anything really soft. Okay, now we'll go to this guy. Lay the pigment down towards the middle. Come up the edges on some of them if you want. Just keep a light touch, that's all, if you do that. Okay, tap. Maybe a light line here. Go in with the back of your brush and just pull out some lines and squiggles. That one dried a little quick. Let me just put a little more paint there. Again, okay, rinse and dry off your brush and just kind of kiss those edges. You don't want to really work them because you don't want really smooth edges. You want those kind of expressive lines to come through. And you can see as I'm dragging it up, we're getting layering effect here, and that adds to the expressive quality of the petals as well. One last guy. Just going to get a little more paint here. Just do a little line up there. Now this one, I think the paint's a little thick, so it's not traveling out so much when I drag it. So I'm just going to add a little bit more water. And I'm not applying a lot of pressure when I do this. You don't want to scratch and tear your paper up. I'm going to rinse my brush off, tap it off my paper towel, and just start nudging some of those lines. Now that one went a little heavy, so I'm going to pick some of that pigment up, like so. Add a little more pink there. Just keep it really loose. This one really dried on me too. Let me just get that moving a little bit. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with some Payne's Gray. I'm actually going to turn my palette around here so I have better access to my Payne's Gray. And I'm going to tap the excess off on my brush. And I'm just going to go in and tap in a bit of gray here. And we'll do this one. I don't want to go into this one yet because it's still pretty wet, but you're going to do the same thing here. And you want a light touch. You don't want heavy lines coming out with this gray, so you're just kind of flicking with your brush, with the back of your brush, just to pull some of this gray out for the centers. And this is Payne's Gray, so it dries a little lighter, but we will go back in and beef up the centers with a little bit of a darker gray, more pigment than water. But for now, we just don't want to go in and be too heavy-handed with it. Err on the side of caution. That one was almost too watery. I'm going to tap some of it up there. Okay, and if you find your brush is making too thick of a line, just switch to another brush that has a smaller end on it. Now I'm going to go into really heavily pigmented Payne's Gray. I don't want it watery at all this time. Actually, I think what I'm going to do is switch to my smaller brush. So I'm going to take my size 4. Whoop. Okay, so this is highly pigmented. Just make sure you've got a nice tip on your brush, and we're just going to tap in just some random dots, just with the very tip of your brush. Okay, and you're not trying to tap these on the tips of all these little lines you brought out. You're just going to tap them in randomly. Just add some life and some interest to the centers, just like that. Just go wherever. is loose and carefree, right? So you can see now how light the center's dried with that gray. So now we're going to go in with heavier pigment. And we're just going to add a little bit of contrast to those centers. Don't cover it entirely. You want some of those lighter areas coming through. And if you feel like your stamens have kind of gotten lost while you have this wet paint in the center, you can go back in and drag out a few more stamen lines, just like that. Just try not to get too carried away with the center. You don't want it just getting too dark and muddy on you. And there you go. There are your simple, loose, and expressive watercolor flowers. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful. And I really hope you'll give this a try. It's a lot of fun, and it's just really nice to see these expressive lines and just some kind of movement and character to your loose florals. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me and supporting my channel as always. Take care, and I'll see you next time.